Hi. So I get a lot of emails and YouTube comments asking me different questions that maybe something that I haven't explained well enough on my videos or my watercolor tutorials. And I thought I'd go over some of those questions today and just answer them in a quick video here. I've got a list here, and I'm just going to read through some of the questions that I've received by email or on my YouTube comments. If you haven't had a chance to read through all the comments, I do try to reply to comments that are asking questions about watercolor and so forth. So if you do have questions, you're welcome to email me, ang@angelafair.com, or you can comment on my YouTube video if it's a particular video you have a question about. I'm going to start with this question from YouTube user P055355, and he's asking, is it okay to use a heat gun to dry your paintings? And I did use a heat gun in my sunflower tutorial because I wanted to, videotape everything in a short period of time, and I wanted my layers to dry quickly. I generally, as a rule, I do not use any kind of blow dryer or heat gun to dry my paintings. I find I like that time to kind of give me an opportunity to think about what I'm going to do next, plan out my next step in my painting, and also I've found that when I do use a blow dryer or a heat gun, I need to be very careful because it will cause the paint to dry a little differently than it would if it was allowed to dry naturally. In our climate, we're very dry here, so things do dry quite quickly anyhow. Bernadette Rose asks, can I use acid-free cardstock for watercolor painting? And I really don't recommend it. I'm really a stickler for using professional quality watercolor paper. Don't just use what you find at Walmart or a grocery store or even just a general art supply store. I really encourage you to use professional watercolor paper. You might not notice the difference at first between that and a cheaper student grade, but there is a big difference. Your watercolor paint will soak into the paper differently, it'll move on the paper differently, and because so much of what we do with watercolor is very fluid, adding a lot of water, it's important that we have consistency in how the paint reacts on the paper. I have a question here from Becca, and this was an email, and she was asking, when I put the paint from my tubes, I use watercolor tubes, when I put them into my palette, and assuming then that I would keep it in a Ziploc bag, which I do. My palette is very old and it didn't come with a lid. So I keep it in a large Ziploc bag when I'm not painting. So she's asking, how well does it set up? Aren't the colors going to be really runny? And what I do is when I'm filling a watercolor palette for a student is I take my tube of paint, I squeeze it in, I give it a day or two to sit out in the air, and it gets kind of a skin on top. Underneath is still kind of gooey and just kind of soft and tender. I don't want it to get crunchy and cracked and dry, but once it has that skin on top, then I can put it in a Ziploc bag and it doesn't make a mess. After a painting session, I would give my painting, my palette some time to dry before I put it in the Ziploc bag. And moving on. Carol from Toronto, she's asking me about classes. She said she was looking on my website for the classes that I teach. And what you'll find on my website in terms of classes are all local classes. I live in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, up in northern Canada. And so I'm not teaching anywhere physically other than that at this point. I have a young family and I just can't get away the way I would like to. I'd love to teach all over the world, but maybe I'll have to save that for retirement. I am trying to do more tutorials on my YouTube page, on my YouTube channel, so let me know what you're looking for. Again, in terms of time, I don't have a ton to do tutorials, but I really want to do more. So I'd love to hear what you'd like to see in terms of a watercolor tutorial. And I have a great floral video I'm hoping to get uploaded soon. Another question from Sylvia from San Diego. She says, for a future video idea, could I post a show and tell of my collection of art supply brushes, the ones I keep in my studio? She says the people in her watercolor club are obsessed with watercolor brushes. And that's kind of a fun question because I think watercolor artists get that all the time. What brush did you use? And it is important to have a good brush. And I'll show you my collection of brushes. They're all out because I've been painting. And I can show you all of them. And I think my collection is kind of slim. I've got 7 brushes here. So it's kind of slim for a watercolor artist. Lots of artists have, 50 or more brushes. And I'm not like that. I don't actually use this one, although I paid a lot for it. I can't bring myself to throw it away. And this one I just bought because I was looking for a bigger round brush. It's made by Opus, who's our big art supply company here in British Columbia. They're out in Vancouver. So because this is my first try for a big round brush, I didn't want to spend a lot. And so this was an affordable brush for a larger size. And then the brushes, I do keep a couple flat brushes on hand. And I don't spend a lot on those either because they're, again, kind of a backup brush. And I don't spend a lot on my rigger brush, this long pointy one for doing branches. But the ones I really love and the ones that I do spend a little bit more money on are these Winsor & Newton Artists Watercolor Stables. They're the Series 7, and I really love them. They make a beautiful point. They're a sable brush, so they're just a little bit higher end. I don't know, I'm sure you could get more expensive, you know, Mercedes kinds of brushes, but I really like these. They are the brush I use for, these two are the ones I use for probably 90% of the painting that I do. So again, not a big collection of brushes. You don't have to have a ton. Moving on, Lori from Toronto says, or from Ontario says, she's been teaching classes for 10 years and she'd like to be teaching at home and bringing in more students. And that's something I do. So she was just asking for advice on how to advertise and get the word out. And I have worked in tandem with my local art gallery. They're a public art gallery, and so they're quite willing to display my brochures and to promote my classes, even the ones that I have that happen in my studio here rather than at the gallery, although I do teach at my local art gallery as well. And I've found really kind of good success with advertising on my local Facebook group. The local buy and sell, I made sure that they have, that they don't restrict advertising home businesses, because some buy and sell groups do. But I've advertised through the buy and sell, and I've connected with some people who maybe wouldn't have considered painting classes before, just through that group. And because I teach at home, I can keep my costs low and I can have a small class size, which I really love. It's really nice to be able to give your students one-on-one attention because you only have a half a dozen people that you're kind of supervising. And a big part of watercolor teaching is helping people to know when to stop, and just that little thing that they might need to do next, just to give them some good counsel. So I like being able to do that in my classes. I had a request from Maria from Portugal to do a video on painting hydrangeas. And I do show just a quick video of, just a quick shot of my hydrangea painting on my leaf tutorial. And I think that's the only hydrangea I've ever painted, actually, but it would be a fun thing to paint. I love hydrangeas and they don't grow in our northern region. So that's on my list, Maria. There's a request from Engelhafen just asking, again with my leaf tutorial, do I ever use frisket for adding veins to my leaves or scraping out? And the short answer to that is no. I don't. I generally use either negative painting to paint the veins on my leaves, where I paint around the veins and have a lighter colored vein, or when I actually paint the veins darker, depending on what the leaf looks like. Frisket is another term for liquid mask, and I do have a bottle of it. I rarely use it, but it's a masking fluid that when it dries, it forms a barrier so that your paint doesn't absorb into the area that has the masking fluid. And I'm going to do a little tutorial on how to use masking fluid soon, so watch for that. And as for scraping out, that's more like using a credit card or something to move that paint around. And I'd like to try it actually a little bit more. I'd like to see, I think that would be great for adding texture to tree trunks and stuff. But it's just a technique I haven't really glommed onto. Ninja Clam 95 asks what brand of paint I use. And I use a bunch. I try to go for an artist's quality paint. So I look for artist quality, not student grade. I've noticed that the pigment is just more saturated and you get more pow for the color. So I use generally Winsor & Newton artist grade watercolor, and I've been using Daniel Smith watercolors too, which I really like. So, you know, and I'll just try different brands when I come across them. I do get a lot of questions about where I'm from and what my accent is, and I am Canadian. I live in northern British Columbia, so there's that. And I had a comment, and I couldn't find it when I went to make up this list. But just asking about my complementary colors, I was talking about using, I think it was in my pine tree video actually, when you mix complementary colors, in my pine tree video I use phthalo blue and then an orangey red as a complement. And isn't that going to make the colors muddy and brown instead of more vibrant? And when you mix two complementary colors, so colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel, red and green, for example, blue and orange, yellow and purple, they muddy each other up. They do become a neutral. When you put them side by side, they make each other kind of pop. So in how you use them is what kind of color you're going to get. In addition, when you're mixing complementary colors, you might get a brown or you might get a gray depending on those colors and how pure they are and how I guess, yeah, just their different tone. So I find that I get a really beautiful gray, for example, when I'm mixing cobalt blue with burnt umber, which is kind of an orangey brown. And however, when I'm mixing, I've been really enjoying mixing a yellow and purple because it makes this really kind of funky, modern, yellow beigey color, which is kind of fun to use. So it just depends on which complements you're mixing, what kind of neutral you're going to get from them. So those are the questions I've just read through today, and I do get a lot more. Those are just a few of them. And I'd love to answer more of your questions. Like I said, I do try to answer questions in the comments on my videos and questions that are sent me by email. And I'd like to do another video down the road just sharing some more answers so that all of you can benefit from those different questions. So feel free to shoot me your questions, and I'd love to know what you think. Thanks.